Hey everyone, Derek from the Handoff here. So today I'm going to be going through an introduction to Figma, and this is going to be a two-part series because there are too many things to cover in just one video. So if you haven't subscribed already, click the subscribe button below so that you can get notified when part 2 comes out in the next week. So if you're stumbling across this video for the first time, you might be interested in using Figma, which is one of the top UI and UX design tools in the industry. In fact, it's one of the top tools that you actually need to know in 2021 if you want to get into design, because a lot of designers and a lot of companies are already using this. And the thing is, this is so versatile that for me, I use Figma in Google Drive, and that constitutes most of my workflow. But unlike Sketch, it operates on PCs, and it also works offline without access to an internet connection as well, as long as you have the file open. So it's really considered one of the strongest tools for collaboration because you can edit documents in real time with others, just like Google Docs as well. So there's a few things I'm going to be covering in this video, but you can jump directly to the timestamps in the description box below or in the chapters in the video if you already know certain things. But if you watch this all the way through, you actually might learn new things that you already don't know. So I'm going to do a quick overview of getting started with Figma. They actually started back in 2016. Before that, they were in beta for a while. So it's actually pretty amazing to see their transition over the past 5 years. So to get started, you go to figma.com. And the first thing you need to do is just create an account. So you can try Figma for free, where it's going to ask you to create an email, a password, and it's going to ask you for a variety of different questions that ask you about your role at your existing company, whether you're a designer, a student, an educator. There's a bunch of onboarding questions that they're going to ask, but that should be pretty straightforward. Something I want to call out is at the very bottom here under students and educators, you can click on that and actually gain access to the free education plan if you're a student. So if you're currently attending a boot camp, or if you're a master's student and you're attending courses full-time, you can actually gain access to their student education plan, which allows you to have some of these benefits that you otherwise wouldn't have if you were not a student. So being able to get unlimited access to a lot of their features, these are things that you would usually have to pay some sort of subscription for. So that page actually looks a little like this, where you have your name, your email. It's going to ask you whether you're a student or a teacher, and then you can just tell them why you're applying for Figma education. You can tell them you're a student who's learning UI, UX, and you want to be able to apply some of the skills that you're learning in your program by using Figma instead of one of these other tools. And it's going to ask you for your school's name, and there's a bunch of schools in the dropdown, and they just use this information to validate whether you are a student or not. And for me, it took me, I think, a few minutes before I got approved when I was a student. So this is a great program to take advantage of. All right, so moving on to Figma. So Figma has a desktop application that you can download from their website. I'll drop a link in the description box below if you're interested in checking that out. But you can also access Figma on the web as well. So any files that you want to open, you can actually open these files in the web version on any type of modern browser that supports it. So for example, if I have one of these files, I'll actually take the Figma Basics link. If I right click on this and I open it inside here, it's actually going to be able to show me everything that I would see in my application on the desktop version, but on a mobile browser. So this is really powerful. And the reason why I really like this is that because when you're working with other designers, other developers, even product managers or people who have never seen designs before, you can send them a link like this and they'll instantly be able to get that and gain access to it without creating an account if you have that open, and also be able to just pick up the tool really quickly without having to create an account. So with that, I'm going to give an overview of this section. I'm going to try to make this pretty brief because some of these concepts are really around just finding access to your files and figuring out how Figma organizes and structures their content. But I have my name here in the upper left-hand corner. You can click on this to modify your files and your settings and just personal preferences around your account. At the very top, they have 3 tabs. They default to the Settings tab. There's also plugins where you can create these plugins that extend other things. This is not something we'll get into right now. You can also come in here and check out teams. So the concept of teams is really powerful because if you're working on different projects with different teams or companies, you might want to consider creating different teams so that people don't gain access to files without your permission. And also so that you can better organize your files, your projects, and the people that you're working with. So in this particular case, it creates a team for me. under my name. You can also have a team for your school. You can have a team for maybe a full-time job you have, maybe a internship that you have. There's a lot of ways to organize it. So within the concept of a team, you have this idea of a project. So the hierarchy here is you have a team, you have a project, and in those projects, you can have files. You can also have files that live outside of a project, which we'll talk about in your draft section. But most of the time, if you're working with other people, you'll want to organize this in some way that makes it very clear which project a file belongs to, who has access to that file, and how you can collaborate through that particular organization, hierarchical organization. So with that, let's come back here to the recents page, because this is one of the most straightforward ways to approach Figma. Within this workspace, I currently have 5 different files. So by default, it gives you the Figma basics, the team library, the prototyping, and the wireframing. And they'll show up in the order that you specify here in the dropdown. By default, I usually have it set as last viewed, which means that the last time I touch a file, it's going to be the first file that shows up for me. So the more I touch a file, the more it shows up in the most recent section. You can also sort by list or grid view if you prefer one over the other. But you can also see access to your files in some of these other tabs as well. So the search tab allows you to find files. If you have a lot of them, you can also search by projects and the people that you work with. Within community, you can actually find a lot of files and plugins and things that other people have created, because the design community is so collaborative that it's great to be able to explore and see what other people are doing and be able to use those files and things that they've built in the designs that you're coming up with as well. And then any files that aren't considered as part of a project will automatically be thrown into your draft section. So this is only stuff that typically you have access to unless you specify it in your share settings. So you can actually right click and you can see what other people, who else has access to this file. So if you want to add editors, you actually have to move this file from a draft into a project. So that's something that they've added as a limitation. So you want to be able to do that and move it into one of these projects here, whether it's just a team of yourself or if it's a team of other people, so that you can collaborate on these files. With that, let's actually take a look at how you create a file. So I have five files here. I'm going to delete this because I don't think it's very relevant right now. It's just an untitled file that I created earlier. But if you click on the plus button up here in the upper right, you can actually create a new file. So Figma gives you a lot of defaults that you can select from. We'll start with the blank canvas, although you can use some of their other pre-made templates for different activities with designers that you know. When you're working with a company or for a company, you might have these brainstorms and these default mind maps and things that you can take advantage of, so you don't have to start from scratch. This is relatively new to Figma, but you can also select what type of screen you want to build for. In the case of just learning Figma, let's start with the blank canvas, because it'll be good to learn about how Figma organizes the canvas and how they organize their files so that you can best get familiar with Figma in the tool. So I'm going to skip this for now, but in here you'll see that I've created a new file called Untitled. That's what Figma automatically titles it as if you're creating a new file. It's located within my drafts. And also here it's called Untitled. So I can actually come in here and rename it by double clicking on the name. You can also do the same thing by coming back in here and clicking rename, which allows you to rename the file directly from your recent or your drafts. By coming back in here, you'll see that I have this concept of a tab bar, which allows me to navigate between files more easily, even if they're between projects or on different teams. So it's very similar to the concept of the G Suite, where you can have maybe one Google Doc in one tab, you can have a Google Sheet in another one, you can have Google Slides. It's very similar to your browser, and you can have multiple tabs open at the same time, but you'll only be able to see one at a time. With that, let's get familiar with the interface. So within here, there's a few different parts of Figma. You have this top navigation bar here, where on the upper left you have access to this little drop down where it essentially hides all of these things within this drop down list, and you can see all of these different tools and features at your disposal, and some of these are more advanced, so we'll get into them. I almost never have to use this, Sometimes I might have to look for something that I'm unfamiliar with, but I try to learn the hotkeys as much as possible, and that's something I'll try to call out during this tutorial. In addition to that, you have all of these tools here. You have a mouse selection button. If you hover over each one of these, it actually tells you what the tool is for. That's something I wish Figma did a little better, especially when you're first learning the tool. If you're using Photoshop, or you've used Photoshop or Sketch or XD in the past, a lot of these icons might look familiar to you. So for example, the rectangle icon, the pen icon, the text icon, the hand tool, and also just the speech bubble, which allows you to add comments. So this we'll get into, but just know that this is here for a lot of the most common tools that you'll be using when manipulating items on your canvas or within your Figma file. On the left-hand side here, there's a few different things that I want to point out. You have this concept of layers, which might not make sense to you right now, but if you're coming from a different tool, this is essentially the same thing as layers in anything in the Adobe suite, or if you're coming from XD or Sketch, it's the same concept where you can create different objects inside your canvas, and then they'll have some sort of hierarchical structure depending on how you're placing them. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. It will make more sense once we get there. You also have this concept of assets, which is more of an advanced concept, but it allows you to create something once and then reuse that same thing over and over again across different files, within the same file, across different projects. It's a very powerful tool that we'll get into, but here within this little drop down for page, you can actually see that right now we're only on page 1. You can have multiple pages within a file. So this is what I would consider different sections. There's a few different ways to organize your pages, but sometimes if you're working on a website or if you're working on an app, you might want to break out your website or app into different sections, especially if it gets complicated. Almost anything in Figma that's interactive, though, you can actually right-click and rename or duplicate or delete, and this little plus button actually allows you to add a new page. So by default, I just created page 2. On the right-hand section here, we'll actually skip this for now because this is going to be more relevant to you once you actually start creating objects here in this main content area, or what we consider the canvas. Two more things to note is just in the upper right-hand section here, you have my little icon, and if you have multiple people working on the same file, you'll actually be able to see who else is in the file at the same time. You can see their cursor moving around. And then if there's more than maybe say like 3 or 4 people, it starts telling you the number of people who are in the same file. I've been in files before where there have been 40, 50 people kind of just moving their mouse around. It gets very chaotic at times, and it's usually not really meant for that type of support, but it's there if you ever need to share a file with your friends and your family and anyone you know. You can also share your file with different people. So we saw the screen earlier. It's the same screen that you see in the default view, but you can invite anyone with the link to see it. You can add people, you can give them edit permissions or only view permissions. You can copy the link and send it to people that you know. There's a lot of things that you can do here, and it's very similar to Google Docs. This play button isn't very useful right now, but once we get into creating some screens, creating some frames, and then start prototyping, this play button will be super useful for communicating your ideas and thoughts to other people. And then the percentage icon here just allows you to zoom in and out. Right now we're at 100%. If I zoom to 200%, you actually won't see anything because this background is just a gray background, which you can change here. I can set this to any other color. By default, it gives you this nice little gray. I believe you can change that in your preferences section, but this is here if you need it. I typically zoom in and out using my mouse. My trackpad, I can zoom in and out by using the pinch in and pinch out tools. So that covers the interface of Figma. I'm just going to be introducing a few basic concepts before we'll get more in depth around some of the things that you can do in the next part of this 2-part series. So coming back here to the upper left-hand section here, we have a few different tools that you can get through. The first thing I want to start with is just by creating some rectangles. So the rectangle button is the R button on your keyboard, or you can come under here and click rectangle under the drop down for shape tools. You'll notice that your cursor changes from your mouse icon into this little plus, which means that you can start dragging. In the middle of my canvas, I'm actually going to just go ahead and drag and just try to create some sort of rectangle shape. And you'll see that by highlighting over this rectangle and letting go after I drag it, it creates this new layer for me. So this is what we were talking about earlier with this concept of a layer. This is just any type of object or element that Figma considers as part of the layers panel here on the upper in the left-hand sidebar here, and also how it's presented on the screen. If I came back in here and I created a circle over my rectangle, you'll see that I actually have a circle. In this case, it's called an ellipse. And if I hover over it, it actually shows up over the rectangle. You can't see it though because it's actually the same color as the rectangle, in which case if I came in here on the right hand section to the design section, you can actually manipulate a lot of the features and different things associated with the layer that you're modifying. So if I came in here and just changed it to black, you'll see that the black circle or the black ellipse shows up over the rectangle. So those are a few ways that you can add shapes. There's polygons, there's arrows and lines. You can also drag and drop images that you find on the web. So if you just Googled cat, for example, and drop that image in here, you would see that as an image that shows up. And I'm just going to go over to Unsplash right now. All right, so if you're not familiar with Unsplash, this is actually a great website to find images that you can use for your app or your website, and it doesn't require attribution, although it is really nice to be able to attribute the original photo credits to the photographer. In this particular case, I searched for a cat. So if I took this image and just dragged it into my canvas here, you'll see that a picture of a cat shows up, and it creates a new layer here in the left-hand layers panel. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and drag it down so that I can resize it. And this automatically creates a new layer here for me. So I can rename a layer. So I can just rename this to cat photo. I can rename this to black circle. And I can keep that as a rectangle. So there's a lot of different things you can do. You can also come in here and add text as well. So this is really powerful for you to come in here and learn how to create text and modify it. So how to create text in Figma. So you can type into this field the same way that you would in a Word document. You can also click and drag so you can specify a specific height and width for your text area. But most of the time I just click once so that I can just start typing, and then I manipulate the text so that it only takes up as much space as it needs to. So there's a lot of things that you can actually do in Figma here. For example, if I clicked on my text, you'll see that there's a lot of options that allow me to modify what's going on with the text on the right-hand panel here. So within the design section, if you hover over or click on any of these elements in your layers panel that we just created, so your circle, your rectangle, or your text, you can actually see that there's a lot of settings associated with it. And I'm going to quickly run through each one of these before we hop into the next part of this series. So for text and any other elements, these are typically going to show up for every single one of the layers that you create. The X coordinate of where this shows up on the canvas. The canvas is actually a finite size according to Figma. I've never had to actually use all of the space. If you are using all of that space, I would definitely recommend you start creating different pages, because it's going to be very hard and unwieldy to navigate a huge file. So the finite size is actually negative 65,000 to 65,000 on both the X and Y coordinates. But this here gives me a X coordinate of negative 139. If I wanted to set this at 0 and set the Y coordinate to 0, this actually moves the text down here. And I can just move the circle and the rectangle down so you can see that this is currently at 0, 0. So this point right here is considered where 0, 0 is. There we go. So with that, you can also specify how wide you want the text to be. This isn't really going to do anything to the text, but rather it's going to change the space that contains the text. You can do the same with the height. Typically, I like to keep this such that it takes up just as much space and width and height as it needs. For a rectangle element, for example, this might be more relevant because you're going to have your width and your height here. And you can adjust this so that it's square, so that the width and the height are the same value. Same with your circle. If I wanted the circle to be 150 by 150, this is now a perfect circle instead of an ellipse. So with that, here coming back to the text, there's a few different things that you can touch. For the layer option here, we won't talk about this now because it's more of an advanced concept. But within the text section here, you can see that there's a variety of different fonts that you can choose from that pull from your computer. If you're using the web browser version, you might not be able to access all of the fonts on your computer, and you might have to install something in order to do so. That's especially important because if someone is using a font, or if you're using a font that other people don't have on their computer and you're sending them the web browser version, they might not be able to see the font on their local computer without going in and downloading it. For me, I'm using this on my desktop and I have a lot of the fonts installed already, so it's able to render the text as is. You can also specify in the case of fonts that have different values. So if I switch this to Arial, which is a pretty normal font, you can see that I can actually switch between the regular and bold version, the italic and bold italic version. If I'm choosing a font that has more options, you can see all of the options here. So all of the different weights: light, regular, semi-bold, bold, and extra bold. You can also change the font size here. So this is 12 pixels. We can change it to 18 pixels, and that's going to make the text a lot bigger. In this particular case, because I set the width and the height to be a static value earlier, so here if I double clicked on one of the edges here, it's going to automatically resize so that the text fits into the area neatly on one line. This is really powerful, and coming in here you can see that if I start changing things, it's going to reflect those changes. Alright, so this value here is specifically for line height. Right now it's set to auto, but in the case where I had multiple lines and I wanted to increase the amount of spacing in between the lines, I can use this and drag. So essentially what you'll be doing is over the icon for this, there's going to be this little cursor that shows up that shows that you can either adjust left or right. So right maps to a larger value, left maps to a smaller value. And you can actually just type into this field if you want as well. You can specify pixel height. So if I just wanted 24 pixels line height, or if I wanted 160% line height, those are things that you can do. Same with letter spacing. You can specify the letter spacing amount. That can also be a pixel value. This is going to be a paragraph value, which is different if you have different types of text, so text blocks instead of different text lines. Here, we won't talk about this for now because it's more of an advanced concept, but this is very similar to what we talked about earlier with being able to change your width and height and whether you wanted to take up as much space as you wanted to, vertically or horizontally, or if you wanted to be auto set so that it only takes up as much space as you need to. Here you have your left align, your center align, or your right align options for your text. You can also top align, center align, and bottom align vertically. So this is more for the horizontal axis, and this is more for your vertical axis. If there are styles that you want that you don't see, you can actually click on here to see all of the different possible styles. I almost never come into the screen, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. Down here, this is where you care a little more about the different fills and strokes for the things that you're creating in terms of elements. What I mean by that is for text that you have here, in this particular case, we have black text. If you want to change this, we essentially just click on the color. You can type in the hex code. You can switch this from hex to some other type of color value if you prefer RGB or HSL. Those are also things that you can do. You can also specify the opacity, or you can just use the traditional color picker and just choose a color that you like. Coming in here, you can also specify the stroke. So the stroke is that border around your element. For a rectangle, that stroke is going to be around your rectangle. For a circle, it's going to be the same idea where you're going to have a stroke. And in this case, it doesn't show up because it's black on black. But if I set this to red, you can actually see that there's a red border around your circle. Coming in here, there's a few other effects that you can apply. So you can change the color of your stroke the same way that you did with the color of the text and the fill of the rectangle here. Same concept. I can come in here and change this rectangle to red, or in that case, let's actually choose a lighter yellow because that red was pretty hard in my eyes. But here you can actually add drop shadows. You can add a variety of different other effects to this. So in the case where you do want to add some sort of drop shadow, you can manipulate those values by coming in here and specifying the X, Y coordinate, blur, spread. Those are things that are more advanced, but they're there for you if you want them. So in the case where you have your fill, you can actually add a variety of different fills and strokes if you want to combine colors, or if you want to add combinations of those fills. So I'm going to come in here and actually set this to around 20% opacity, and this will create a very transparent pink on the background. If I also wanted to add some sort of gradient from top to bottom, you'll see that now instead of a color value, it says linear. If you open the tab up here, there's a variety of different choices that you can choose from. So solid, linear, radial, angular, diamond, image. I typically stick with radial, linear, and solid most often. And this linear and radial refer to a gradient that you can apply. And the direction of the gradient is denoted by these little two arrows, or these two little circles here on the line. This one that's highlighted is the color that I want to apply to the top. So if I wanted to start with a yellow gradient at the very top, I can actually do that and apply maybe a lower opacity. I can also apply a different color at the very bottom. So in this particular case, there's no white because it is set at 0 opacity, but if I change this to 100%, or maybe even 80%, you can see that the text at the very bottom is now white. So that's a really useful tool if you want to apply, get a little more fancy, but that's not something that I use too often unless I'm designing websites or something that's more visually oriented. So with that, this concludes the first basic tutorial of Figma. In the next part of this two-part series, we'll be going over how you can start to create some of these common screens that you see in your UI or UX design program, or if you're getting started in the field, how you can use this tool to best communicate your designs to other people who are going to be working with you. If you have additional questions around Figma, or if you'd like to keep up to date, click the subscribe button or leave a comment down below. I'm happy to answer any questions around Figma, and you can connect with me in my LinkedIn, or check out some of my other videos if you're interested in learning more. So thanks for watching this video. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.